This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Otelli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. New Zealand's foreign minister heads to Beijing, intending to raise concerns about inadequate notice by China to military live fire drills that forced dozens of passenger flights to be rerouted. A last chance to defend himself. South Korea holds final impeachment hearing to decide President Yoon Suk-yeol's fate. The verdict is expected in mid-March. And Japan urges G7 unity for Ukraine, stressing zero tolerance for changing borders by force. The call comes as allies worry that the U.S. is moving away from its previous stance on the war. And President Donald Trump's administration looking at ways to further choke off China's access to advanced chip technology. Also in East Asia tonight, Hong Kongers looking to see what the city's annual budget will bring. Businesses want a prudent plan to tackle deficit and slower growth. The economy in focus in Beijing as well as China prepares to host the two sessions. We take a look at how the decision-making mechanism has evolved over the years. Australia says 49 flights had to change paths last week after China launched surprise live fire exercises in the Tasman Sea between Australia and New Zealand. But China's defense ministry insists that it issued repeated safety notices ahead of those drills and has accused Australia of hyping the issue. Well, Australia says it only found out about the drills after a commercial pilot alerted them. Air Services Australia's Deputy Chief Executive Peter Curran says that officials were unsure initially whether the alert was a hoax. He says the alert from the Chinese Navy was broadcast on an emergency radio channel monitored mostly by pilots. Now, that advisory was then relayed to air traffic control, prompting them to set up an exclusion zone and issue an immediate warning for planes. Several airlines, including Qantas, Emirates, Air New Zealand and Virgin Australia, were quickly forced to divert their routes. Pilots are usually alerted to military drills or rocket launches that can affect airspace through what's called notices to airmen, or NOTAMs. Now, these are normally filed at least 24 hours in advance of an event. Both Australia and New Zealand have raised the issue with China, claiming they were not given adequate notice. New Zealand Foreign Minister Winston Peters is on a 3-day visit to China and says that he will question Beijing over the matter. Tan Yu Guan joins us live now from Shanghai for the very latest. Yu Guan, so what has been China's response to these accusations from Australia as well as New Zealand?
Well, as far as what we can see from the reports that are out there, in today's regular foreign ministry briefing, this was not raised. But after Canberra lodged a diplomatic protest with Beijing earlier, China did respond by saying that it was deeply surprised and strongly dissatisfied by Australia's response. Now, China's defense ministry spokesperson said on Sunday that the vessels did repeatedly issue safety notices in advance, and that Australian leaders had made, quote, unreasonable accusations against China and deliberately hyped it up. Now, the spokesperson said that China's actions stated that China's actions are in full compliance with international law and international practices and will not affect aviation safety. Now, as far as the letter of the law is concerned, the spokesperson is perhaps right on that count. It is worth noting that both New Zealand and Australia did not accuse China of breaking international law of the sea, as the drills did take place in international waters, or the so-called high seas. Now, according to the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, it places no constraints on high seas military operations. But the Australian Defence Minister was critical of the short notice that China gave for the live firing exercises. As you said, the minister said the standard protocol is to provide between 12 to 24 hours notice for such exercises, so that there's enough time to warn other ships and also airlines to divert their flights. However, it's worth noting that because the exercises took place in the high seas, the protocol is more ambiguous. So it's a case of Australia wishes that China will give more notice, but China isn't really legally obligated to do so. Still, Still, Article 88 of the law of the sea does state that the high seas shall be reserved for peaceful purposes, unquote. Now, if China is in violation of that because of the live firing drills, then, well, US and other major naval powers will also be guilty of conducting live firing exercises in the high seas.
That's interesting, Yuguan. So can we expect bigger implications because of this latest incident pertaining to ties between these two countries?
Well, I mean, surely this will make ties between, China, Australia, as well as New Zealand a little bit strained. Politically, this can be awkward for both the Australian and New Zealand governments. China is, after all, the biggest export partner for both Australia and New Zealand. And this episode actually follows improved ties between Beijing and Canberra as China trade freeze on many Australian goods has been gradually thawed. But if the electorate down under see the exercises as signs of aggression towards Australia and New Zealand, then it could make it difficult for the respective governments to sell that improving ties with China is a foreign policy achievement. Now, the drills also come at a time when there's concern down under with increasing cooperation between China and some Pacific island nations, such as Cook Islands and the Solomon Islands. Now, the Cook Islands in particular, recently struck a wide-ranging deal with China. Now, this is the first time that the Cook Islands signed a deal with a country outside its traditional partners, New Zealand and Australia. Now, the deal is economic in nature. It does not include any security elements. However, it does mean that Chinese interests have now entered the region. It's worth noting that the Cook Islands is a country of about 17,000 people. It operates in free association with New Zealand. That means the tiny nation is able to govern its own affairs, but New Zealand provides assistance in foreign affairs, disaster relief, and defense. And what's more, its citizens hold New Zealand citizenship, which is why China's deal with the Cook Islands, and done with little consultation with New Zealand, have raised some eyebrows, and it could enter discussions and when the New Zealand foreign minister meets Chinese officials in the next 3 days. Otelli?
Well, let's see what comes out of that. Well, thank you so very much, Tan Yuguan, speaking to us from Shanghai. A last chance for South Korean leader Yoon Suk-yeol to defend his presidency. Today is the final hearing in his impeachment trial at the Constitutional Court. The judges will decide whether to remove him over his martial law decree in December or restore his powers. Now, a verdict is widely expected by mid-March. If the court backs the parliamentary vote, Mr. Yoon will become only the second president in South Korean history to be impeached. Separately, the suspended leader is also facing charges of insurrection and abuse of power. He could face life imprisonment or even the death penalty. But experts say that this criminal case is expected to drag on for 1 to 2 years. Now, correspondent Lim Yoon-suk has been standing outside the Constitutional Court since the morning, and she joins us live. Yoon-suk, President Yoon arrived at the Constitutional Court just hours ago. What is he expected to say today?
Well, yes, he is inside the courtroom right now at the Constitutional Court, which is that building behind me. And, it's difficult to know exactly what he is going to say. He hasn't made his so-called speech yet. But many experts here think that it is possible that he could start off by offering an apology to the Korean people, because it is possible that this could be his last time as the president of South Korea to be making a speech to the Korean people. So he could offer an apology for creating this political turmoil, but he is expected to remain very firm in his stance that there was no wrongdoing on his part by declaring that martial law, and that it was done within his presidential rights. And he has said in previous sessions here inside the courtroom that he had to do that because of this opposition-led parliament, which was impeaching many of his government officials, including about 29 of them within the government, and that it was also planning to downside the budget in 2025. And so we think that is what he is going to explain at the inside the courtroom later today too. But right now, many experts here are saying that he could also, in fact, offer, to the Korean people an explanation as to how he planned to run the government if he is allowed to do so, if he is not impeached. And so, we'll have to wait and see exactly what he says. But it'll be interesting to see whether he says anything more than what I've just really mentioned.
Right. From the outside, though, Yoon, so we've seen hundreds of Yoon supporters hold rallies nearby, and today is no exception. We can hear all that chanting. Tell us more about the situation at where you are.
Well, yes, there have been protesters and supporters outside the Constitutional Court all day, and in fact, every single day since he was impeached and arrested. And today was no exception. There were some of them outside here from this morning. Right now, there are about 50, 60 of them. But let me show you where I am. That's the Constitutional Court behind me. But the street leading to the Constitutional Court have all been closed off, and it has been like that all day here. And it's not just that area, but also in other areas around, so that many of the protesters, of the supporters, will not be able to come to this area. Now, as you can hear the chants, there are people over here too, and they are behind, if you can see those buses, they are the police buses that have really just been there all day, and the protesters and the supporters are behind those buses. Right now, you're hearing chants by those supporters of President Yoon Suk-yeol, and they've just been going on and chanting really the same chants, saying that President Yoon Suk-yeol should be saved, that President Yoon Suk-yeol will be protected by them, and they believe that the Constitutional Court should not impeach President Yoon. Now, security around this area was tightened today. There were about 1,000 more police who were deployed to this area compared to the previous sessions. And we are hearing reports that there will be more protection on the day that the verdict will be announced. And in fact, all the police here in central Seoul is expected to be on the highest alert on the day that the Constitutional Court announces its verdict. And so right now, there are rising concerns that there could be some kind of a clash between those supporters and those opposing the impeachment on the day that the Constitutional Court announces its verdict. And so we believe that, there'll be more protesters out here on that day, and all eyes will be on that day when the Constitutional Court and the 8 judges inside the Constitutional Court decide on the fate of President Yoon Suk-yeol.
Hey, thanks so very much for that report. Yoon Suk there reporting to us from Seoul. Well, we're going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, South Korea's central bank trims its benchmark rate to support an economy jolted by political turmoil and U.S. tariff fears. And later, we'll look at how Hong Kong plans to navigate a tough economic landscape when it presents its annual budget tomorrow.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
Mass deportations were a central pillar of Donald Trump's re-election bid. Immigration raids are being carried out across the country. And the family now faces the prospect of being torn apart. The day the dream died. CNA correspondent Wednesday on CNA.
It was once billed as a living paradise.
That's a combination of tourism, leisure, healthcare, education, low-carbon city.
Malaysia's forest city could now be stuck in development hell.
A lot of media has called this field mega ghost town city.
Will plans to rejuvenate the mega project succeed?
The government can't just leave this huge area there to rot and to crumble.
Forest City, reviving Malaysia's ghost town. Insight, Thursday on CNA.
Hello there. Thanks again for joining us in East Asia tonight. We have Roland Lim standing by with updates on business news. Roland, tell us a little bit more about the U.S. planning to further toughen semiconductor restrictions on China.
You did hear right. It is trying to get more of its allies to join in limiting China's access to the latest chip technology. But first, South Korea's central bank slashed interest rates and its annual growth forecast as it looks to bolster the economy in the face of U.S. tariffs and the fallout from President Yoon Suk-yeol's brief declaration of martial law last year. The Bank of Korea cut the benchmark interest rate by another 25 basis points, taking it to 2.75%. The central bank had held interest rates unchanged at its meeting last month. Analysts say the easing today will give the economy additional support as Trump's tariffs threaten its exports. The BOK has downgraded the country's GDP growth outlook to 1.5% this year from as much as 1.7% projected earlier. Asia's fourth biggest economy expanded less than expected in the final 3 months of 2024 as President Yoon's martial law move hit consumer confidence and domestic demand. That compounded fears over U.S. President Donald Trump's hardball trade policies, which risk escalating a global trade war. And that's expected to impact South Korea, given its reliance on trade for economic growth. Analysts expect the U.S. levies to hit the country's automobile, pharmaceutical, and semiconductor industries the most. South Korea is home to the world's key chip makers as well, Samsung and SK Hynix, and was the fourth biggest exporter of steel to the U.S. last year. Bank Governor Ri Chang-yong says that South Korea would continue to face challenges with tariffs unless it develops new industries. Checking in on the market's reaction to the policy moves, the Korean won weakening against the dollar by 0.35%, 143.360 to the dollar, and the benchmark Kospi index closing down 0.6% for the day. It was also weighed down by overnight losses in U.S. tech stocks. The Trump administration is reportedly planning to toughen semiconductor restrictions on China, continuing and expanding the Biden administration's efforts to limit Beijing's technological prowess. Bloomberg says U.S. officials recently met with their Japanese and Dutch counterparts about restricting Tokyo Electron and ASML engineers from maintaining semiconductor gear in China. Some Trump officials also aim to further restrict the quantity and types of NVIDIA chips that can be exported to China without a license. There's no official stamp on the report yet, but it suggests Mr. Trump's goal is for key allies to align with the U.S. in imposing restrictions on China, similar to those placed on American chip gear companies. Beijing has condemned Washington's plan of coercing its allies into going after China's semiconductor industry.
美方将经贸科技问题政治化、反安全化、工具化，不断加码对华芯片的出口管制，胁迫别国打压中国的半导体产业。这种行径阻碍了全球半导体产业的发展，最终将反噬自身，损人害己。
The report comes after the U.S. went a step further on China with additional investment curbs. And the fallout from escalating tensions is affecting market sentiment for Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba. U.S.-listed Alibaba shares plunged more than 10% overnight, but is making a slight recovery in pre-market trade. President Trump's latest executive order sparked concerns over rising trade tensions between the U.S. and China. The sell-off marks a sharp reversal after Alibaba and other Chinese tech shares rallied recently amid optimism about China's AI boom fueled by DeepSeek. Over the weekend, Mr. Trump directed the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S. to restrict Chinese spending on key American technologies and industries. The Trump administration will also consider new or expanded restrictions on U.S. outbound investments to China in sensitive technologies such as semiconductor, AI, quantum, biotech, aerospace, and more. Now, these actions are likely to escalate the already strained economic relations between the two economic powers, a tension that has been building since Trump's initial move to raise tariffs on Chinese goods early in his presidency. Meanwhile, Alibaba has pledged to invest more than $53 billion on AI infrastructure over the next 3 years. Now, the plan would make it one of China's biggest AI infrastructure spenders. Staying with the AI sector, Huawei has reportedly made major strides in improving its AI chip production, marking a breakthrough in China's push to become more self-reliant in semiconductor technology. The Chinese tech giant has increased its yield, that's the percentage of functional chips, to nearly 40%, according to sources. Now, this marks a doubling from 20% just a year ago. The progress has reportedly made Huawei's production line profitable for the first time, with plans to further increase yields to 60%. This milestone strengthens China's AI industry and supports its goal for semiconductor independence, despite challenges from U.S. export controls. Now, Beijing has encouraged local tech firms to shift from NVIDIA's AI chips to Huawei's, as NVIDIA remains the leading player in the market. Shares of Japan's 5 largest trading houses surged today following news that billionaire Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway will increase its stakes in the companies. Now, this comes after the firms relaxed their ownership ceilings. Shares of Itochu, Mitsubishi, Mitsui, Sumitomo, and Marubeni rallied after the announcement, and the stock price of Itochu, Mitsui, and Sumitomo rose between 4% and 7%, while Mitsubishi and Marubeni jumped between 7% and 9%, outperforming the Nikkei 225, which closed at its lowest level in 3 months. Berkshire first invested in these firms back in 2020. At that time, Berkshire's holdings were capped at below 10% in each company. Now, the firms have agreed to moderately relax these ceilings. Buffett emphasized that the investment is for the long term. Investors in Hong Kong also looking ahead to Financial Secretary Paul Chan's annual budget speech tomorrow. The city is facing its toughest fiscal test in 3 decades following a painful run on deficits. Some observers believe it's necessary for the government to consolidate its spending and to remove some stimulus measures implemented during the COVID-19 pandemic. CNA's Mei Wong has the details.
73-year-old William So has worked in this dim sum restaurant from day one for the last 46 years. But gone are the days where the restaurant was packed to the brim, with customers hanging around tables waiting for seats to free up. After the COVID-19 pandemic, business has dropped by up to 30%. Recovery has been slow, as with most retail and F&B industries in the city. And Mr. So says government help has been insufficient.
希望佢唔會忘記我哋中小企啦，又唔會話對大嘅企業都要體會佢哋嘅。中小企咧係要幫助佢就係乜嘢咧？有啲嘢要簡化啲嘅，能夠令到佢暢順啲嘅，仲有鼓勵下啲中小企，唔好話去好嚴厲嘅好多法例去監控佢嗰啲所謂叫做又話環境啊、食品啊嗰啲嘢。
As the outlook for the global economy ahead remains hazy, Hong Kong is preparing a budget that'll help the city weather the challenges. While trying to retain its reputation as an international financial and trading center, the city's economy, however, continues to face issues like structural shifts and weak global demand. The first thing observers are expecting to see in the upcoming budget is what expenses will the government be cutting back on, and what other revenue streams can be tapped on. One suggestion by the city's business community: levy up to 5% of taxes on digital activities of non-Hong Kong resident e-service providers.
Based on last year's estimates, we believe that for 2024, there could be like 3.5 billion US dollars digital service revenue generated here. And assuming if we apply like 5% digital service tax rate, it could perhaps generate like 1.3, 1.4 billion Hong Kong dollar. We want to create a level playing field for Hong Kong-based digital service suppliers as compared with the non-digital service suppliers, which do not make any economic contributions to Hong Kong.
Higher taxes are one way to increase government revenue. Last budget, Hong Kong upped taxes on those who earn more than 5 million Hong Kong dollars or $643,000 US dollars annually. Some believe the government may expand that income bracket to tax more high-earning individuals. With appropriate and targeted policies, economists say Hong Kong may be able to save another 14 billion Hong Kong dollars or 1.8 billion US dollars this fiscal year. Another area which Hong Kong could exploit is that of money flowing back into the city with more attractive policies to court family office investments and IPOs.
U.S. instead of Hong Kong usually, or in the past decade, has been the ideal spot or the preferred spot for listing activity. So right now we are seeing a lot of Chinese firms that are choosing Hong Kong as their top choice for listing their companies. So I think this sort of flow should be captured by the Hong Kong government with the right set of policy.
Some suggest the government also look at plugging existing gaps to encourage more business activities. Hong Kong has been seeing a significant number of empty offices. As at the end of last year, the overall office vacancy rate stood at 17%, with some 15 million square feet space unused. This compared to the office vacancy rate of below 4% about 10 years ago.
There is one thing that the government should consider, and that's broadening the use of commercial space. Under the current or existing planning framework, the working practice has changed. How people use commercial space has changed. Can office building be used for something else, like for industrial buildings, etc., etc.?
Last year, Hong Kong saw a 2.5% economic growth, just touching its forecast of between 2.5 and 3.5%.
This year, analysts expect the government to lower its growth forecast to between 2 and 3% as Hong Kong navigates through potential disruptions in an ongoing US-China trade dispute. Now, despite challenges ahead, observers hope that the administration will make use of this budget to boost the residents' and investors' confidence with clear policies that'll set the direction for how Hong Kong intends to steer its way through rough waters. May Wong, CNA, Hong Kong.
And you're all caught up with the business news. We'll tell you.
Thanks so very much, Roland. We're going to go for another short break now, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, China's Two Sessions offers a rare glimpse into where the world's second largest economy is headed. We discuss how the meeting has evolved over the years with Alfred Wu, Associate Professor at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy.
Step into the future of airports where innovation takes flight. Explore cutting-edge technology, transforming operational efficiency and sustainability. Discover strategies to develop world-class airports and stay ahead of the latest industry trends. Join us at Inter-Airport Southeast Asia from March 25th to 27th at Marina Bay Sands, Singapore. Secure your free pass today. CNA is the official media partner for Inter-Airport Southeast Asia 2025.
This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we have been following. Australia says 49 flights had to change paths due to a Chinese Navy drill in the Tasman Sea. The revelation comes as New Zealand's foreign minister visits Beijing, saying that he will bring up the issue of inadequate notice. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol returns to court for the final hearing in his impeachment trial, his lawyers fighting to defend his botched martial law attempt. And Japan calls on G7 nations to unite in bringing peace to Ukraine as allies worry about the U.S. changing its stance on the war. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba says the peace process must not send the wrong message that it's all right to change the status quo by force. China is getting ready to hold its most important political meetings of the year next week, known as the Two Sessions. And they refer to the convening of its legislature, the National People's Congress, or NPC, and its top political advisory body, the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, or CPPCC. Well, the yearly affair first began in 1959 when the two political bodies started synchronizing their meetings, although their origins date all the way back to earlier times. It's become a rare chance for the world to get a glimpse into where the world's second largest economy is headed. While state media reported the NPC Standing Committee held its plenary session on Monday, discussing the agenda and attendees. But how have these meetings evolved over the years? Well, to discuss this, I am joined by Associate Professor Alfred Wu from the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore and CNA's China correspondent Olivia Xiong from Beijing. Our first question to you, Professor Wu. I believe you were a journalist from the year 2000 to 2007 in China. And I'm curious to know, what was it like covering the two sessions then? You know, what were some of the big stories you've covered? How easy was access? Just tell us more about your experience then.
I think during that time, the two sections were marked by quite a lot of openness. Then journalists had a lot of opportunities to engage with the delegates. I think make it very simple. We had meals together all the time. So journalists could talk to delegates on all kinds of occasions. Then because we were actually domestic journalists, so we could access to all press briefings and also all kinds of informal conversations. But we also report our findings and also discussion to our editors. But overall, I would say that at that time we had a very, very good time. Even myself, I covered the two sessions for 5 years. Then some people joke that you already actually finished a term like other delegates, like lawmakers.
Well, it sounds great. You had meals together, you had access, to a number of speakers. Let's bring you in, Olivia, because you yourself, you've covered many editions of the two sessions. Help us understand, though. I mean, is it different or similar to what Professor Wu just described there?
Well, Telly, from the time I've been in Beijing, it's been a bit different from what Professor Wu described. No meals together with delegates during the meetings. But, from these few years, there has been a notable shift from the pre-COVID period to the COVID era. At one point, we had to stay in this media quarantine bubble so that we were able to access the site. Delegates also had to be quarantined during that period. In 2020, it was also the first time that these sessions were not held in the March period. And instead, because of of the pandemic were postponed to May. And the length of the sessions, too, has also changed over the years, even though it's not fixed. For years, the sessions ran for about 2 weeks. I remember back in 2018, we covered an extremely long session that ran for 18 days straight. But during the COVID period, that got shortened to about a week, and that has continued since then. And last year, things kind of got back to pre-COVID times. In Beijing, though, it's also a time when security is heightened, because of all the delegates in attendance and their road closures, also because China's top leaders attend these meetings as well, and nothing can be left to chance. For example, I was in a cab the other day, and there was a reminder for cab drivers to make sure that their vehicles were kept neat for this event. And Prof, I would just like to ask you as well, we've talked about the evolving nature of these two sessions. What do you think this signals about China's leadership and its development phase?
I think overall, China already actually passed through some stages. China moved from a low-income country to a middle-income country. Then China nowadays no longer actually really emphasize 百花齐放, letting 100 flower bloom. So they don't actually really rely on local initiatives. I would be thinking that in the past, two sessions mostly serve for agenda setting. So it means that central government officials, experts, and also local government officials, experts, and also maybe opinion leaders all together, they try to have something together, then try to make agendas for the year. But now it no longer suggests the case. It's much more like a national level meeting, and then try to emphasize something, pass through from top leader like Xi Jinping.
Oh, 百花齐放. Well, thanks for teaching me a new phrase there, Professor Wu. I'm always interested in learning more Chinese words. Olivia, so I want to touch on one of the key things that actually all of us will be looking out for, which is the government work report. And I believe it is a very important report, isn't it?
That's right. It essentially is a blueprint for China policy-wise for the year ahead. And it also includes that very closely watched China GDP annual growth target. And I just want to give you a sense of just how closely watched this report is. And I have some pictures here that I took in 2019, where you'll be able to see the media on the floor of the Great Hall of the People just pouring through this report to get the latest figures and policy announcements there. Many journalists actually would line up overnight outside before the venue doors open in the thick of winter. And that's how important this report is, because it is always the headline, not just for the day of the opening of the National People's Congress session, but also for many days and weeks to come. But how exactly is this report put together? Here's a closer look. It's a major set piece at the opening session of the National People's Congress annual gathering. The Chinese premier, who heads the State Council or China's cabinet, delivers the government work report to a hall full of lawmakers, journalists, diplomats, and other invited guests, revealing closely watched targets and tasks for the country. The practice first began more than 70 years ago in 1954, when China's top legislature, the National People's Congress, was formed. But how is this report even put together? A wide-ranging document which typically covers everything from GDP growth targets to monetary and fiscal policy positions and industrial policies. But it's not just about the economy. Past years have seen other inclusions, like a call to push forward China's toilet revolution or to improve China's cultural soft power overseas. Work on the report begins at the end of the year. The State Council formulates a special drafting group comprising members mainly from its research office, representatives from select government departments, local governments, and experts are also invited to participate. And the group's main task is to consult widely and formulate an initial draft of the report. Online platforms are also used to gather public feedback. Last year, officials said more than 1.6 million suggestions were received, about 80% more compared to the year before.
Next, the content is reviewed at key meetings in January and February. These involve the Politburo, the top leadership of China's Communist Party, government ministers, and other senior officials. The Premier also holds discussions with leaders of smaller political parties, industry groups, and experts in various fields. Feedback is considered by the drafting group, which then refines the report before submitting it to the Premier for approval. The last step is what's seen more publicly. In March, China's largely ceremonial parliament, the NPC, reviews and discusses the report during its annual session, which last year ran for a week. A vote is then taken at the closing, which has so far always ended in overwhelming approval and the passing of the report.
So aside from the toilet revolution, and we've got improving Chinese culture overseas, the Chinese leadership clearly issues many other different policy documents throughout the year. Professor Wu, to what extent do you think this government work report actually sets the tone for the year ahead?
Chinese usually, like to plan in spring. So two sections always had it in spring. In this document, actually, it's not just a government work report. Finance minister's budget speech will be coming soon as well. So overall, it laid down for the whole year's economic, social, and also political development. So it's quite crucial for the government administrative, particularly to carry out the jobs following two sections discussions.
So, Olivia, I mean, at the two sessions, we have the main meetings, but you're also been keeping track, right, of the sideline events and the press conferences, because they are important as well, aren't they?
Absolutely. These events that take place on the sidelines of the main two-session meetings at the Great Hall are also closely watched by journalists. And this is a rare chance for the media to pose questions directly to many of China's top leaders and government ministers, even if these may be highly choreographed sessions. The most popular sessions have included the Meet the Press with the foreign minister, and it really reflects China's evolving interests globally, with the questions becoming extremely wide-ranging, from China-US relations to its relations with Africa and even Southeast Asia. Another popular news conference used to be the Chinese Premier's Conference. And I say used to be because it had been a tradition for decades. But last year, the NPC announced that it was going to do away with the Chinese Premier's Meet the Press session. Instead, it said that there were other news conferences being arranged, but these were also different from the standalone sessions that different government ministries and agencies would have in the past. Instead, what we saw were themed news conferences, for example, on the economy. And it was quite a rare sight to see all the big guns of the economic agencies, financial regulators, sitting at the same table answering questions from the media. And it's also a signal, too, of the different kind of leadership style that we are seeing in recent years. Prof, although we do know that these sessions focus on domestic issues, there's also a big question this year, given the new Trump administration and how things may play out with the China-US relationship. Do you think we'll see any specific statements or signals from the two sessions this time on that?
My own understanding is the two sessions are for domestic purpose. But in the meantime, we did actually observe that on some occasion, Chinese leadership talk about foreign relations. In 1 year, Xi Jinping particularly mentioned that the U.S. strategy, particularly jeopardizing China, that's the reason why Chinese economic performance was not so good. So to some extent, this kind of statement try to reinforce some argument, particularly Chinese leadership want to signal to the national audience, I mean the domestic audience. They want to try to have some signaling for people to understand how difficult or how hardworking they are. Then, they try to have some of their own propaganda or like messaging on what they should do in the next couple of months.
Right. And Professor, what would you be looking out for? I mean, the audience for China's leadership in these meetings, as you say, tend to be more domestic or global. But what is the key thing that you think we should be eyeing out for in the Lianghui?
I think this year it will be very much focused on AI. You could see DeepSeek stir quite lots of debate. Then we also could see that the Chinese leadership met a number of private enterprise owners like Jack Ma and also other people. I would be thinking that in these two sections, two focuses will be very obvious. Number one is AI development, and also number two is about how to boost consumption, how to boost the confidence of private enterprise owner in China's economy. So overall, they have two purposes. Number one is let other people know that China is still in good shape economically. And number two is China try to have a better relationship with other countries. Then China could be a very good places for people to invest in China, particularly for outsiders.
All right. Thanks so very much for your analysis. Associate Professor Alfred Wu from the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. And of course, CNA China correspondent Olivia Seong, thank you so very much. Well, starting tomorrow, we will dig into the key topics that are likely to emerge from this year's two sessions, beginning with the big push to get Chinese consumers to spend more, as what Professor Wu had said, and also to give its economy a boost. Right. Ahead of those key meetings in China next week, a national political advisor has recommended lowering the legal age for marriage to 18. Well, Chen Songxi says that he hopes to, quote, unleash China's reproductive potential to stem its population decline. Presently, the legal age for marriage in China is 22 for men and 20 for women, higher than most developed countries. Mr. Chen also plans to submit a proposal to completely relax restrictions on childbirth and establish an incentive system for marriage and having babies. China's population fell for a third consecutive year in 2024 as marriages declined by a fifth. Now, that's despite incentives rolled out by authorities to encourage young couples to tie the knot and have children. Coming up on East Asia tonight, Japan's ambassador to ASEAN sits down for an interview with CNA's Chatni Vatmani to explain how Tokyo plans to ride out the economic uncertainty amid the Trump tariffs.
In Singapore, something happens every minute, each event vying for your attention. We're always there to cover the news. But what if we also give you more? What if we told you we go deep into the data, find stories you care about, and explain issues clearly, from housing to healthcare, security to sustainability? We give you the bigger picture on Singapore Tonight.
3, 2, 1.
Hello and good evening. I'm Shahida Othman. Tonight's top stories.
Our planet is being battered. But can tech like blockchain, AI, and even robots help to restore it? I'm Louise Mabulo. I'm traveling the world.
All right, let's go.
To witness firsthand some amazing tech.
So cool.
That's redefining the fight against climate change.
Evolution has found out its way to kind of have its own Spotify list.
That's incredible.
I was kind of playing with his data, and he had this hunch that with AI, it could be done better.
So the artificial intelligence is now analyzing, is this actually a fire?
Tech to save the world. Starts 7 March on CNA.
Taiwan's Coast Guard says it has detained a cargo ship after a nearby undersea cable connecting Taiwan to the Penghu Islands was severed. Now, the ship was intercepted in the sensitive Taiwan Strait before being escorted back to land. Although registered in Togo, Taiwan says the ship was crewed by 8 Chinese nationals and had Chinese funding. Now, the Maritime Defense Agency says further investigation is required to determine if the incident was an act of sabotage. But authorities are not excluding the possibility of what they call a grey zone intrusion by China. Now, these activities are intended to put pressure on Taiwan, which China claims as its own territory without direct confrontation. Communications between Taiwan and Penghu Island remain unaffected. The ship Hongtai 58 had dropped its anchor near the subsea cable around the time it was reported disconnected. Today's incident is the latest in the slew of damage to Taiwanese undersea cables. Past incidents were blamed on natural causes or Chinese ships. Taiwan reported 5 cases of cable malfunctions this year alone, compared to 6 over the previous 2 years. Japan is urging G7 nations to unite in bringing peace to Ukraine. But Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba says the peace process must not send the wrong message that it's all right to change the status quo by force. Now, this call for unity comes amid concerns that the U.S. is moving away from its previous stance on the war. At a UN vote to mark the 3rd anniversary of the conflict, the U.S. joined Russia to oppose a European drafted resolution condemning Moscow's actions and supporting Ukraine's territorial integrity. Well, instead, they supported a U.S. drafted resolution calling for an end to the conflict, but not putting any blame on Russia. Well, the resolutions were tabled as French President Emmanuel Macron visited the White House. The French president stated flatly that the aggressor is Russia. He warned against any surrender of Ukraine and said a ceasefire must come with security guarantees. As President Donald Trump pivots towards the Kremlin, China's President Xi Jinping held a video call with the Russian President Vladimir Putin, affirming their no-limits partnership. Mr. Xi said both countries are true friends who have been through thick and thin. The move was seen as an attempt to dampen speculation that Mr. Trump might drive a wedge between the allies. Meanwhile, Beijing has poured cold water on a suggestion by President Trump that the US, Russia and China all cut their military budgets by half. Mr. Putin said it was a good idea. China says its defense spending is limited and entirely necessary to defend its sovereignty. US President Donald Trump has imposed or threatened a series of tariffs which could hit Japan's exports and hurt its already sluggish economy. In an exclusive interview, Japan's ambassador to ASEAN, Masahiko Kiya, told CNA's Chatni Vatvani that Tokyo is not rushing to respond so as not to inflame trade tensions.
As we observe the developments, we respond in a proper manner. I think it's premature to see any individual actions, or we need to really first observe the developments. Otherwise, we cannot make a proper, effective response.
Could we see Japan taking on a leadership role in free trade amid the threat of tariffs and rejection of multilateral institutions by the US?
I think there is a RCEP, that's a reciprocal trade agreement of this region. So I think I myself working very hard to really enhance some economic collaboration, and that's what I'm really focusing on. I would say 2 areas are digitalization and decarbonization, and I think probably the biggest initiative at the moment is Asia Zero Emission Community approach. And I think we engage so many ASEAN countries and to make a practical approach, country-based, supporting country-based efforts for decarbonization while ensuring energy security and energy's affordability as well, and also decarbonization. And also in the field of the IT, cybersecurity, AI, and the digitalization of micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises.
Issues like coal dependency and funding are major challenges for ASEAN countries when it comes to energy transition.
3 things: the regulatory framework, finance, and technology. Those 3 need to be concurrently addressed. Japan is in an ideal position. Japan worked so hard in the latter half of the last century for ASEAN's Flying East economic development, supporting supply chains and supporting manufacturing industry, connecting all the countries in ASEAN. So that's why ASEAN has come this far. So we are quietly proud of Japanese companies' contribution. That is the background of the trust that the ASEAN gives us. Then what we are doing now is to make that again this very important, to address this very important challenge of energy security and decarbonization. How to do it in this ASEAN environment. So first, country-based approach is most important. No straitjacket solution. So each and every country needs to really analyze the situation and have a tailor-made program which will be financed, properly regulated, and then with a latest technology to substantiate those ideas. Japan had them.
And this wraps up East Asia tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at CNA.Asia. And you can also look us up on Facebook and on YouTube. Have a good night.